Hey, what's up? How's it going, Tony?
Heyo,
Uh,
it is still going.
it is forever will be that way. Yeah, thanks for making time. So we have this biweekly time set aside with basically you and Ethan Gould to show us some behind the scenes work as artists making RPGs. So yeah, thought today we would pick your brain and see some of your process. And we were just chatting before the show about what to talk about. And seems like maybe today we're going to focus on some new work that you and I are actually working on in terms of mechanics.
Hmm.
And it's really an idea. You were driving for a kind of dream game, and then I had separately been thinking about doing a dream game. So we're thinking about trying to make mechanics that could work for both. Even though I think the first one we'll put out is yours, probably as a zine. So I know the art style is something we talked a little about that had driven you and inspired you. So maybe that's something we can sort of just chat about today and kind of maybe early stages. How do you get into a project and begin creating visual like language? Like how do you want to draw it? Since this is not Blister Critters, which is something I know you've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years, like thinking through and developing. And we're still,
Yeah.
of course, publishing and excited. We have a new zine for that coming out very, very soon. But yeah, so those are just some topics. Obviously, we can also talk about fun mechanics and stuff. But since it's about drawing, figured a lot of this could be, how do you do new styles? How do you like create a language for a game? How different does it need to be, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if you
Yeah.
have any thoughts on that. Yeah.
No, for sure. I mean, I think specifically for Pistols and Pajamas, it's been something that's really been on my mind. I forget, like, I know how the game came about, like, in my mind, but I don't remember specifically what made me want to, like, really follow kind of a new design path for it. But uh, for Pistols and Pajamas, I want to evoke like 19th century like children's books. Um, just kind of like really lean into the kind of golden age. Some of the things I was reading kind of put it, and this like revitalization of like, well, I think during specifically the time the like children's books weren't really a thing, and then as they slowly became a thing, illustrators and artists were kind of like employed to make them cooler than just a bunch of text blocked on a page. um, and so there's all these really interesting different forms of people trying to explore and figure out I don't languages that read well to kids but are also interesting to look at, which I don't think are mutually exclusive. Um, but to tie it back into pistols and pajamas, there's a lot of really great like pen and ink work of that time, um, that is a style that I used to use more before I kind of got into what I'm doing now with like Blister Critters and a lot of the other work that I do that is way more focused on not necessarily looking traditional, but just kind of being like graphically fun. And so I'm trying to with pistols and pajamas. I'm trying to find like a language that um, looks somewhat hand drawn, but has like the benefits of or traditionally drawn, but has the benefits of it, being done digitally, so I can like fiddle with it. Um, but all in the goal of kind of evoking that kind of dreamy, pseudo realistic, like Alice in Wonderland esque like illustration vibe, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it looks like old school, like cartooning a little, which is a little different than Blister Critters, which to me read as the kind of comic book. Like there's very defined lines, and then flat color. So the flatting makes it look to me like a '90s or on like comic book, whereas this has the sketchiness and the softer lines and stuff that make me think of like Calvin and Hobbes, even just like
Mm-hmm.
comics from the newspaper that I grew up reading as a kid that were not comic books. And obviously nowadays and with indie comics and stuff, it's kind of all over the place. But in terms of visual style, there felt like there were two distinct styles. There's that like hard black line with flat colors where everyone is kind of ripped, and then there's like everyone is kind
Yeah.
of everyone is kind of like an ugly little kid, with a sketch, kind of no matter how old they're supposed to be, right? From like Doonesbury through Calvin and Hobbes, right? Of all those classic kind of newspaper comics. And I'm sure there's a more sophisticated way to talk about it that I'm not a historian of that. kind of cultural production. But I feel like the 19th century thing is interesting, and I'd have to see more. I definitely know what you mean about Alice in Wonderland. There's I think a couple great editions that have very specific cool art from that time period. But this doesn't look totally old school to me in that way. I mean, this definitely looks informed by kind of cartooning, I guess maybe is the right word.
Yeah, there's definitely something that I'm still searching for, I think, in the way that I want to render these. A lot of the ways that like Blister Critters comes about stylistically is very fast. Like it literally doesn't take me that long to do. Um, but I almost want for the artwork that I do for Pistols and Pajamas, I want to be more, I don't know, like meditative. For me, just as an artist, I want it to take longer. I want to, I don't know, hone my craft a little bit and explore um, like a different area, a different feel that um, I don't normally spend that much time with like each given piece. The longer I
Mm-hmm.
kind of sit on it, the more I start to get like antsy. But I almost want to intentionally take more time working on this stuff. And right now I'm just kind of sketching and moving about kind of quick. But I'd like to when I go to do the more finalized versions of stuff for the game to you know be more intentional with it. I want people to open the book and be
Yeah.
to not be tricked, obviously, but to have the sense of like, oh, this feels like an almost 200-year-old book. That would be like a cool trick in my mind to pull off as like a thing that um, I don't know, an
Yeah.
achievement artistically.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about that, the kind of trompe l'oeil, idea of like fooling the eye that it's a different genre than it is. So it's actually indie NSR RPGs, to be specific and nerdy, but to make it look like, oh, it's like a kid's book from a long time ago, or like a reprint of a 19th century classic, or
Yeah.
early 20th century like classic Western themed kids book about a sleeping child who goes on an adventure. Um, and we can talk more about, as we've done with Gunless Gauchos, and on some of the Why We Roll episodes we've had about Weird West and the problems of basically
Hmm.
having to make a decolonial genre out of an extremely colonial genre.
Yeah.
But here first I wanted to point out, Taylor in the chat has asked, hey Taylor, a great question here. When thinking of 19th century kids books, I think of etchings or watercolor. How did you
Hmm.
decide what materials you want to emulate?
Um, looking at in the doc that we share, there's a tab that's like full of like inspiration. There was like a day or two that I kind of lost to just scrolling through Internet Archive and like finding because there's a bunch of really cool and really high quality scans in there of books and children's books of that time. It was really just like things that like caught my eye, and I thought that I could push a bit further. Not to say like be better than those artists; those guys are like wacky and super talented. Um, but that I thought I could like take, given what I am good at, and turn it just slightly to expand it a little bit more. So a lot of the etchings. Um, it's been weird trying to find brushes and to get my hand to do things in a way that would look like an etching or would look like watercolor. I've never liked the way that like faux watercolor looks on like Photoshop. Maybe I've just never gotten that great at it, but I think watercolor stuff just kind of looks better when it's actually done. Um, so in terms of what I'm choosing to like emulate, I really want, I think it's a set number of artists. And when I was more kind of deep in the trenches of reading all that stuff like a month or two ago, I would be able to name them. But at this point, the names escape me. But it is a lot of artists that are like really well known for their ink work. Their just like draftsmanship is really really nuts, which is something I think I've not lost, but it's definitely a skill that you don't need to be as well. I don't know. There's a bunch of words I'm not knowing right now, but your draftsmanship can be kind of crappy when you work digitally. Like it doesn't have to be that high quality. Um,
Yeah, so pen and ink, emulating older pen and ink styles or different pen and ink styles is more forgiving, maybe is one way to say it. Whereas emulating watercolor without actually doing watercolor on watercolor board it would be easier to sort of spot like, oh, that's just digital. It doesn't really look truly how water's extremely unpredictable. I love watercolor. I'm not anywhere near as good as Taylor or you, but it's very difficult, I think. Whereas like pen and ink, yeah, it's a little more one to one with if you can kind of train your hand to draw what your eye can see, you can kind of draw shapes and you can correct them and bulk them out or
Yeah, to some
it's maybe a
extent.
little different.
There's also like the literal nature of like you can just undo when you're working in like Photoshop or Procreate, and that is just not like a thing that you can do when you are putting pen to paper. And so there's like a confidence that can be it's really really obvious in artists of that time and like ones that I'm specifically trying to pull from um, where like if I didn't like the shape of the cactus, I could just like erase down the side of it and then give it like a whole like extra arm, extra growth. Um, and like I don't know, there's something just it sounds like I'm just like discovering that people can draw traditionally. I'm like, oh, people can just put pen on paper. Uh, but so much of my work over the past like decade has almost exclusively been digital stuff. Like I really haven't spent a lot of time putting pen to paper.
Yeah.
And so I definitely can kind of feel those muscles. That's what I want to be flexing in the pistols and pajamas stuff. And um, I keep trying to convince myself not to do all of the artwork traditionally for it because it would just take infinitely longer. It probably look cooler, uh, but I don't know. I guess
Yeah.
depending on how far along we get and how much artwork actually goes into it, maybe I will try and like force myself to do these for real.
Well, I think that's part of the fun of developing. I mean, we're calling them zines. They're not really zines necessarily, but having kind of two levels of product design. So we have sort of big product launches with multiple products for a game that is really blowing out like how we would want to have a game, be experienced. So like with Blister Critters, it was fun to do a traditional box set where you get like a smaller rule book, but then a bunch of other, tchotchkes, paper game aids, a whole other little book, right? In a box with dice and all that stuff. And we did a traditional GM screen. It then innovated on that, which was that great idea you had of having slots for cards to go in, so you could sort of show the monsters as like cards in the GM screen, which is really fun. And I feel like I've seen people like hanging stuff off screens and stuff, but this is built into the screen. So that
Mm-hmm.
was like fun product design. But yeah, obviously with that, it's like okay, we're really focused then on this one big game on Blister Critters. Similar to when we launched, Stillfleet, it was really around one book, but it was a massive book with tons of content, and that's how you and I started working together. So now that we're developing, we are still developing, like obviously right now, Danse Macabre as a bigger product. Which again, if folks haven't checked out, I really encourage everyone to check out. It's a super fun game. We were just playing it in person yesterday at a store in New York, and really hoping that one yeah, has that same feel of like a bunch of different books. None of them are super big, but there's a rule book and then some other smaller books for basically adventures settings. And so that is something we're committed to. But we're also doing these what we're calling ZineWorks, this program of like smaller booklets that are maybe they're still 48 pages or something. They're not super small, but they're all A5 and allowing us to kind of get out new games a little faster. So test new rules, that kind of thing. So I think it'll be fun to see from an art perspective. Um, you know, what you do in a few pages, and then we can talk about okay, if we're doing a little later down the line, like a bigger product, do you want to do more by hand, right? Do you want to do
Mm-hmm.
something different there? And I think having those two stages kind of maybe I don't know if it's de-risking is the right word, but allows you to kind of explore, but be constrained to like okay, we're not this doesn't have to be the final big version. We may or may not do final versions of all these. It's not like every zine is going to lead to like a full-on product. Some of them are like to support Blister Critters or Stillfleet of the things we had planned. But I think this one definitely could. I think you and I have talked about that as like, oh yeah, what if we had dream rules that we liked enough where maybe the book has more than just this setting. So this kind of zine is one
Mm-hmm.
setting. I do this kind of Lovecraftian Thomas Ligotti like Eldritch dream setting, and then I know Chris wants to do one that we've talked about, based in kind of the politics of like labor. Kind of reminds me of talking about like Psycho Dungeon, like which is a great game by Kayla Dice of people exploring dreams as a job. And so I think we could do like a book that's the rules for the grid system dream stuff and have different kind of settings built in. And I think those could even maybe have different art styles. That actually is a big question. We've only talked about this one
Yeah.
since hey, one thing at a time. Let's get this done. So yeah, I'm excited to see sort of as you blow out the zine version, like how what you decide on vis-a-vis like, oh man, I really want to go back and like get a notebook and like draw stuff in a notebook versus yeah, digital's faster for like the backgrounds or whatever it is, right? Again, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't know, you know, in terms of what you're drawing right now on screen, just to sort of narrate. Um, is there anything you want to say about the kinds? I mentioned it's kind of a Weird West setting.
Hmm.
Do you want to say more about your idea for like this inspiration of like, I want to do this thing where like you're kids and you're having a collective dream and it's kind of a nightmare, but you're kind of cowboys, but it's not the actual West. So there's no actual colonial anything. It's just like, you know, you're as a kid does, you've fallen asleep watching TV, right? And you're imagining yourself with a gun, but you don't know how guns work, you know. So it's the gun
Yeah.
is like fantastic, right? It's like a magic item basically.
Yeah, the thought came about. I was on Instagram. I Some comedian was telling a joke about working at Walmart. I never finished the joke. I don't know what the punchline ended up being, but he said that all he saw was pistols and pajamas all day, like working at Walmart. And I closed Instagram and I was like, that's a great name for a game. So I just started. I don't know what the rest of the joke was, but uh, I started like scribbling stuff down. Um, and it just kind of flowed from there. I There's something that I think I'm noticing in the kind of themes for games that like I bring about or that I want to capture is like a certain amount of like, I don't know, childhood whimsy, not necessarily nostalgia. Although I do think that Blister Critters has a fair amount of nostalgia depending on like who's running it and kind of where you're playing it. It's kind of a core part of it. Um, but there's a certain amount of like whimsy absurdism that I think I'm kind of drawn to, like naturally, in the different ideas that I want to generate and that I want to pursue. Where some of the grimmer, darker stuff is appealing to me aesthetically, but if I were to sit down, it's not what would come out. Uh, which to me is always kind of frustrating because I really, really enjoy like the Danse Macabre stuff or like the Mad Borg aesthetic or like the some of the genres of music that I listen to. I'm like, I love it. But when if I have to sit down and I'm kind of asked to do it naturally, it just wouldn't be the first thing. It's always going to be Blister Critters or kids in pajamas with cowboy hats and like aliens in the background. Um, and so um, Pistols and Pajamas is one of the first kind of things over the past few years that I have conceptualized that didn't start as artwork first. Like 90% of the things that I kind of bring either to the team or that I work on like on the side is all stuff that I like have a cool illustration for first. And then I'm like, how can I make this a game? But Pistols and Pajamas has actually flipped that for me in a refreshing way where I'm like, I need to now figure out how I'm going to illustrate this idea that I think deserves a lot of um, like fun illustration work to help people get into what is not a difficult idea to express, but I think a more niche kind of setting, I guess, to be not just in the Weird West, but which I think is broadly understood by, at the very least, American audiences, but I'd imagine globally, there's some reference everywhere for that. Um, but to be like a child, almost Rugrat style, thrust into the Weird West, where you don't really know how anything works, but that's kind of like the fun aspect of it. Like you just know there's cowboy hats and horses and cacti, uh, but like beyond that, you are a kid in pajamas, and then to get into some of the mechanic nature of it, you're starting every session, every game with like a different kind of loadout in terms of the kind of pajamas you're wearing or the kind of pistol that you have on you. And so those variations are inherently absurd in the ones that we discussed and that we've written out, where you can start with like a pistol that shoots dynamite or one that only shoots bubbles. Um, that kind of stuff is just fun for me
Yeah.
to
Well,
like start with.
and you're using in this case we're using playing cards, and so also taking the system into a new place mechanically, where there'll be playing cards and some level of kind of betting or using the cards on the table. Not really like poker, but you know, using some of those tropes of having in the case of Hold'em, just a couple cards in your hand. But then there's community cards, and so that affects the GM and the player what the community cards are, and it affects, as you're saying, the kind of loadout. And I think that's a really fun, refreshing, just different way to envision what the grid system is, and what a character is, which is a little different than buying stuff with imaginary credit, imaginary gold or
Mm-hmm.
silver pieces off lists, which is fun and old school, and we do that. For example, Danse Macabre has a sort of historical take on like roughly what the money situation looked like, and there's some tables of stuff you can buy, and it's fun because you're sort of low fantasy, low power, so it matters if you have a sword or not. Um, but I think it'll be fun for Pistols and Pajamas to feel childlike and weird, where you have a pistol, but it's always like doing something kind of different and interesting mechanically, and just not like straight up shooting bullets, because it's it's really not.
Yeah.
That's not what it's about, right? So I think that's a fun, yeah, like take that is very visual, because we're used to seeing images of the Wild West and shooting, and I think people have seen, again, I'm thinking of Calvin and Hobbes, like these kind of kids imagining themselves as cowboys is like a 20th century American thing. So this is a
Mm-hmm.
game kind of playing with that and making it weirder, and making the situations, as you said, you were thinking of aliens right away, and the idea that okay, maybe aliens are the bad guys. Also, there's this kind of Matrix Agent Smith, the dream is after you, like Inception, right? That kind of idea
Mm-hmm.
in there, and I think that'll make it feel very different. And more like Westworld, like using this kind of Weird West stuff as a skin, which at the level of the mechanics, I think will be kind of obvious that it's that the game is not about the West, the game is about dreaming. But I think it's interesting because the art is very much coming from this like 20th century, I guess 19th century tradition of drawing, kids' imaginations, and as you said, well, Alice in Wonderland, the kid is imagining stuff, let's bring it to life in drawings, and that's a fun, different process. Which is actually, and I don't know if this is different, Tony. So maybe to formulate a question, is that different than Blister Critters, where the mutant animals are real, right? They're not being imagined. We're treating them as like, no, you are a mutant frog or whatever.
Yeah.
Here, it's like it's all imagination, so it feels real. It has real repercussions, but like it's not actually physically real. It's happening in your head as you're asleep.
Yeah. And I think some of that is why maybe it's more interesting for me to like want to illustrate it more realistically. Like obvious, like to an extent, like the Blister Critter stuff, especially in the newer like iteration of the artwork for it, I've definitely been leaning more and more cartoony. Even though like canonically or in the game, you're like, no, you're actually like an animal. Um, where I think here, because it's so much more dreamlike, I think I'm enjoying, I think, the flip side of that, where it's like, well, because it's a dream, it's almost more fun to try and illustrate it more like realistically, to kind of lean further into the absurdism of it, or the, I don't know, the imagination side of it, where some of these things like haven't really been illustrated before, or there's a million cartoon animals, and like I have a good time trying to make them new, but um, in the same way that there's a lot of illustrations of that time where they are like very imaginative and kind of at the time like mind blowing, like to various extents. Um, I don't think I'm going to draw anything mind blowing, but I like the idea of trying to capture that I don't know, imagination, or that I feel that you've never like seen a thing like this before, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, I see what you mean. So the genre of cartoon animal is so common, whereas the genre of like there is Weird West, and there's kind of like children's literature, and like even Alice in Wonderland specifically, kind of it was all a dream children's lit, but it's a little less defined as a genre of illustration. It's a little less known. So the expectations, there's more freedom there, and just we don't know exactly what it's supposed to look like. Um, so it's kind of playing with tropes, but it's a little less tropey than cartoon animals is like super tropey, right? We all know there's like associations with different kinds of animals, and like there's different specific, pretty specific shows that we all grew up with, and almost like we were talking about like micro generationally, the difference between
Mm-hmm.
you grew up with Ren and Stimpy or not, or SpongeBob was a major thing or not. Like these are like not actually that far apart in culture, but it like sort of really demarcates like what decade you were a kid. It's like your
Yeah.
relationship to made up cartoon animals, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like I think I think even like there's rules when you're not rules, but there's definitely things you can draw cartoon animal wise where you're like, oh, this reads as cartoon. You give it kind of like the penny or bean shaped eyes where they kind of look like one of these guys. Then you're like, oh, that's a cartoon, or you can give it like kind of the anime eyes, or even like the big googly eyes. Uh, Kind of immediately reads very cartoony, but uh, there isn't like a large. There's plenty of illustrations like what I'm doing. I'm not inventing a new style by any stretch. Um, but I think in the RPG space, there isn't, and I hope maybe I'm wrong. If I am, if people know of games that are similar or games that use a style that is similar, send them through. Um, but I think what I'm trying to achieve is something that isn't super focused on, and I think in large part because I think I'm an illustrator first, and it just so happened to be able to channel that into like, games and in writing. I don't know that most people that are super heavy in the RPG space, like creator wise, come at games art first, and that probably is for the better. Uh, but that is almost always like my first in to making a game is how good can I make it look? What aspects of like the final illustrated product can I look forward to making or to delivering? I've been lucky that we work together so well, and the grid system games like just work because the system is good. But otherwise, I'd still be making games, but it would exclusively be to the end of me being able to draw the things that I want to draw and have people interact with them.
Well, it's that constraint, yeah, and that's fun, and I feel the same way from a writing standpoint because I think if wasn't constrained by like, oh, you have to, like, even frankly sell products, like we have to make stuff that is worth people's money. I think they'd be really long. They'd read more like weird novels, which is cool and fun and might be different, but they wouldn't. I think one thing with making good games is having a strong visual component, and as you're saying, that's balanced by okay, it's not just pictures. It's like what are the rules? How do the rules work and interact
Mm-hmm.
with things implied by the pictures? Like again, if even if they're loosely related, sometimes they're more closely related. It's like the classic, like the D&D I grew up with. Like when you see that a class you can play or species you can be, it's like you're seeing an image of that. And nowadays, I think that's less and less common. It's more sort of like I don't know, you're just seeing weird stuff throughout. Um, I think this book will be a little different too because it's really stripped down, and it's something we're doing. Definitely not. I don't think it's a rule across the game, just or across the system, but for some of the zines, especially like what is the minimum version? Like what do we think is the most fun, or like what is a minimum version that then we add in this case, like a cycle about card drawing too.
Mm-hmm.
So it is the grid system, but it's also like you only have two stats even. So like there's 5 in the base system, there's 4 in Danse Macabre, there's 2 in this game, and I don't think that'll necessarily be all the games will be super minimal. It's just I think for the dream stuff, we're like, yeah, I mean, you don't have a body; it's all in your mind. So it's like, what is your mind trying to do, and keep it kind of, especially I think for the kid version, like it's a little simpler feeling. It's like, yeah, I'm a kid imagining stuff. But I think it'll be actually fun to play test and get right, which we're just starting to talk about being able to do this mechanic, so we can kind of preview where the GM has dust. So you have grit, and the GM is earning dust when you burn grit, and that allows the GM to draw cards for the NPCs. So that's basically the idea. Is like you have your cards, but the NPCs get more powerful and basically deadlier, more Agent Smith like, as you mess around in the dream and burn grit. So you use your mental energy, and it fuels your unconscious to kind of like attack you. This kind of autoimmune thing. And I think the difference here is it's implied it's like fantastically, it kind of is real in that sense. Like, yes, it's a dream, things can change, but like something is going on. There's some weirdness, and you could return to the same weird place. I remember you saying that, which I liked that idea. Like, time can pass, but you keep having the same dream. You keep participating as a hero in your head, trying to solve this problem for whatever's happening. So I think that'll be an interesting thing to write out, and kind of imply and flesh out and see what other people do with, basically, especially for the first, kind of zine version where it's like, I forget what you call it. It's like something gully or something gulch, right? It's you have this sort of implied town. That's again very Westworld to me.
Yeah, Slumberella.
Slumberella, right, right.
Yeah, I like the idea of setting it like Westworld is definitely like a big inspiration once I started diving into what I want Pistols and Pajamas to to feel like, not necessarily in tone that shows very serious, but just the idea that there's like this persistent town, where things do change. I think the change being, or the difference being, that Slumberella would be persistent, and like last session happened, where in Westworld it kind of resets every time. Like every time you kind of rejoin, it's like a new day, but it's always there. So in Pistols and Pajamas, you would be, over the course of however many sessions, returning to the town, trying to avoid being Agent Smithed, and ideally changing the dream for the better. The kind of thing that we talked about a little bit last time was like the Agent Smiths, the Dream Police. We were calling them the Sandmen. Their goal is just to have the dream kind of happen as intended. So there's like a set way the dream needs to go. And by virtue of you playing an RPG and the kind of expectation of saving the day or doing the right thing, which some groups don't, but ideally you see like a bad thing happening and you would step in to try and stop it. And the Sandmen, the Dream Police, kind of stepping and go, well, we know it's a bad thing that's happening currently, but this is just the way that the dream goes. This person does get kidnapped. This thing does explode. And so I think for players, that'll be a fun, I don't want to say twist. I don't think it's like terribly inventive, but I think it'll be a fun change for DMs and players to have that be like the thing that players are kind of having to be faced with. Is that, like, not too dissimilar from the world we live in. There are bad things happening all the time, and people are like, oh, well, that's just the way that it happens. That's how it's supposed to go. Like, well, at least in this game, you'd have the opportunity to change that and be met with being Agent Smithed, with being swarmed by the Dream Police over it.
Yeah, it's like the status quo is enforced, and the status quo is both good and bad. It's good because there's kind of civil order in this dream or in any of these games, but it's also bad because there's bad things, and if you want to change it, you're a heroic type. So in that sense, it's the long tradition of RPGs being about, imagining you having more power. It's a power fantasy about doing the right thing, and I think a dream version is fun because in some ways, when you really think through it, it's like, wait, but it's your own mind, like you're correcting your own mind or something. But I think there can be these ties, like again in Psycho Dungeon, Kayla has it where like your inner thoughts are causing like a real like monstrous infestation or whatever, and you need to like fix it. So you need to do therapy to fix yourself. And I was thinking with the sort of adult version, it's like the horror version is you are touching some sort of shared nightmare that is very real. It's like an eldritch Lovecraftian thing that just occurs in dreams, kind of coming from that tradition of dream lit. So I think it'll be fun to see how the rules allow for different takes on like what it would mean to do heroic stuff in a dream where the rules are very surreal. And I think the art will really drive it because of the surrealism of like, you can look down 1 second and you're holding one thing, and the next time you look, it's like a different thing. So I think that'll be fun to sort of play with. I would imagine, right, as an illustrator, where it's not
for sure,
totally like fantasy, but it's like, like, I mean, stuff can just kind of it's kind of amorphous. It's kind of soft in terms of like what it is. Like it's soft ontologically, to use it. Like, so
and like
weird. Yeah.
Realistically, I think that might be like an extension of the stuff that I enjoy with Blister Critters. Like another, I think, tenet of like things that I like to make is like using like ordinary like objects as like a core game I don't know, mechanic or thing to play with. And so like Blister Critters stuff is like the world around you. It is one of the many, or one of the few big things that kind of makes up every game of Blister Critters. And so I think that kind of carries over into Pistols and Pajamas, where the core one of the core mechanics of the game is that you have kind of a smattering of stuff, of like different costumes and pistol attachments, and but they're all ordinary everyday objects. Similarly, the lucid dreaming stuff that we've been talking about mechanically, where you kind of point at an object or a person or a thing in the world, burn a certain amount of grit, and randomly change it into a different random object, person, thing. Um, I don't know. It for me, there's something really fun about the mundane absurdity of changing, like, I don't know, the like having a carriage with monster truck wheels. It's really goofy. Like, it's not terribly unique or like, I don't know. It's kind of childish, but I don't know. It makes me happy. I'm like, that's awesome. That to go play a game where I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna change that.
Yeah, well,
Um,
something I feel like something you've hit on with these games, with your style, which again we want to support, and it's different, I think, than what Chris and I would do on our own with some of the darker sort of historical stuff, but or in my case, sci-fi, but it's like in some ways it's historical in the sense it's about like real world politics and the afterlives of all these ideas and cultures and movements and philosophies. Like you make these technologies to correct one thing, and I mean it's kind of
mhm.
classic big philosophy questions, but I think yeah, as we kind of hand wave that and don't take it with a sense of kind of wonder, the everyday, and in some ways it's about the it's kind of two different design philosophies. It's like designing the everyday to be weird and alien versus really leaning into the quotidian nature. Like the everyday is the everyday, but then that is actually wondrous and kind of rediscovering that. So I think Blister Critters and Pistols and Pajamas in different ways get at that kind of like, yeah, it would be really cool if you mashed up this thing with this. It's kind of like when you're playing with toys as a kid and you're just making it up. There's no rules. But sort of
Mhm.
before the age, before you get into like storytelling games or strategy games or even video games to a large degree, you're just kind of holding up stuff and like, I don't know, does this go with this? So I think dreams is another good idiom. Kind of like with Blister Critters, you struck on a really cool idea of these are little guys. They're just scale wise. The idea that everyone is around a foot tall, no matter what you choose. You're roughly the same size, and you're smaller than humans. So you have all this stuff, but it doesn't really fit you. You have to kind of remake it. I think in dreams,
Yeah.
similarly, you're a kid imagining yourself to be a hero, but you still know like your unconscious would enforce that you're a kid. So there's a similar scale thing maybe happening of like you can imagine yourself a hero, but you have to kind of keep doing it and changing it because your mind keeps being like, no
Yeah.
man, you're just a kid. So I think there's something fun about these. It's like not like a it's not like the most epic of story, but it sort of sets up a good way for different kinds of players, maybe hopefully to get engaged and tell their own stories, right?
No, for sure. I think a large part of it for me is like, I think something that draws me to that kind of like thinking and the way that I want to like generate these worlds is just that I something that I've been, I don't want to say struggling with, but like thinking over and trying to like figure out over the past like year or so is like, I don't know, I see the world really kind of boring, like very naturalistic and just like it is what it is. Like there's not a whole lot else out there. And sometimes that's very depressing to not have like faith in a thing or to not have um a lot of like personal stake in something that I feel is like literally supernatural. That would be interesting for me. So when I go to make these games, I try to like make what I find like boring about my everyday that much more interesting. Try to like manufacture the absurdity that I wish I felt, or like the wonder that I wish I felt in my everyday. Um, because like if there's nothing else, if it is all just science and math, kind of sucks. So I want to like, oh well, I want to play as a cartoon animal and I want
Yeah,
it to be this world but cooler than the world that currently exists. Not necessarily like on a social or societal level, but like literally in the way that like I don't think the world is like that absurd or crazy. Like on a physics level. Obviously the world's on fire right now. Uh but like metaphysically, or I don't know, there's better words for it, but I struggle with the idea that there isn't a supernatural, and I don't think there is, but I also that also worries me. So
yeah, yeah.
I
Well, I
try
know.
to like I don't know, experience what I can and generate a world that would be way cooler.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. I mean, this is a big thing in science studies, the idea of enchantment and disenchantment, and the idea that like the world used to be enchanted, like we believed in something bigger, and now it's been sort of disenchanted, and that's kind of an issue.
Yeah.
But I think that's where, for me, games play such a critical role, and is like with philosophy is more I've explored like some of these thinkers like Alain Badiou comes to mind, where he's talking about what science does versus what poetry does versus what philosophy does, and that ultimately what philosophy does is kind of conjugate between truths or whatever, so it like allows you to sort of have discussions between art and poetry and like science, that have their own ways of understanding the world and making meaning, and that without these different lenses on sort of what meaning could be, you can get sort of stuck in one or the other. And there's other philosophers I like to talk about that kind of grammars. And I think it's really important because obviously, yeah, we're kind of committed to like, yeah, I mean, we're not making games from this perspective of like traditional theistic religion or so. We're kind of like committed to like social change. But on the other hand, we want to have fun, and fun I think is different than science or politics, and that's, what I mean. It's not like having
Mm-hmm.
fun and imagining stuff is very different than being like, yeah, we should like talk about you know progressive tax rates where the rich pay their fair share. It's like just it's sort of apples and oranges is like an activity. So I think
Yeah.
games can be, and I think one reason why they just haven't gone away despite video games being whatever better and better, whatever it is, because I think you have now. Yeah, no matter how realistic you make stuff, you still want that space for like pure imagination, and there's different ways of doing pure imagination, and we're talking about some of them, kind of playing with science tropes and political tropes, but like with your friends, having fun, blowing those up, changing them, and in this case, kind of playing with, yeah, these feelings of like whatever kid stuff that you would do as a kid, exploring your world, however you would sort of articulate it. And I think yeah, I think there's something really powerful there, and I think games can play that's sort of our, I think our shared like dream of like, yeah, these imagination games can play this like powerful role. That doesn't compete with the hard work of like political organizing or like
Mm-hmm.
scientific discovery. It's just imagination actually is powerful and cool, and we're like, which it sounds sort of trite no matter what, when I feel like when I say it, but I feel like it's worth kind of remembering, especially as we do games like this, because I think, again, yeah, in my mind it was like, oh, I'm going to make all these kind of hard science games, but I think I've been convinced that that's only one. That you don't want to limit yourself, right? Like that's one way to do things, but I don't think
Yeah.
that's the only way, and I think it would be a shame if that was just if that was that, right? So yeah, no, I really appreciate you, Tony, and I appreciate the idea of the dreams. I had independently, because I try to like, I don't really dream journal at all, but I have like ideas for games in dreams, and it's more like images, or like, so I've had a couple dreams where I felt like I was like going to explore kind of an abandoned city, and it's reminded me of some stories by Thomas Ligotti that are very scary coded. They're kind of horror coded, but in some ways it's like, what is it? I mean, it's just, okay, there's some stable thing out there you can only reach in your dreams, which I don't think is real. I'm not saying this
Mm-hmm.
as a scientist is real. I'm just saying like, well, what if it was? Like that's a cool what if. So my version
Yeah.
was very horrific, but I was already headed and like, man, we should do a grid system game dream thing. I was already playing around with cards, so it does feel like you approached me with this at the same time that I was like, yeah, we should do something like this. I hadn't gotten very far. Obviously, I had like a couple bullet points of like things I'd seen in my head that was like, yeah, here's like an image, and that's it. So it's, you had like a draft of like, I don't know, here's some rules. So but it does feel like, damn, that's like, how does that work? That we have the same idea, sort of. So
Mm-hmm.
here we have Taylor has another thought, and I just want to share her thought here. Tony, I can read it. This reminds me of the history of American children's books in general. Kids' books in the 19th century focused on creating escapist, dreamlike stories. As we progress in the 20th century, children's book theory shifted into placing kids in the real world, and there was a bunch of debate by librarians and children's educators at the time on the value of these approaches. So, I think that's interesting to think about, like, without necessarily having tried to. I know you've now done some research, but recapitulating this question of like the place of imagination and like how,
Yeah.
like even like kids as kids, right? Because that's kind of a Victorian invention. Like before a certain time period, kids were just treated like little adults, and they didn't have special protections. And I believe it's kind of the 19th century, right? They kind of earn the status of like protected, different, like after like horrible sweatshop fires and stuff. Um,
Yeah, it's like it's funny because one of the things that I like saw while I was doing the research for those couple of days was like a lot of the books early on, uh, and for a while had a really hard like moral theming to them. Like I sent you a photo. I think I just copied it in, where it's like, here's a horse. he's a good worker. He does he does a good job. He really likes to be working, and if he doesn't work, that's going to be bad for everybody else. And he wouldn't want to not be a good laborer because everyone's going to hate him. It's like, okay. And so there's a lot of stuff like that when I was flipping through. And I read a couple of articles that were describing them as well. Is like a lot of the books of the time like have really wacky illustrations like this. Like it's really well drawn. It's absurd and crazy. But a lot of the stories are superly like morally loaded to be like not even just like be a good worker, like be a good laborer. Some of it's just like listen to your parents, otherwise. And there's a lot of like children's folk tales from other cultures. They're like, listen to your parents or your fingers are going to get chopped off. And like, okay, I guess I guess this is a good way to go about it. Um, but I think specifically in America and uh, in England, there's a lot of the moral loading is around like labor, is around like, well, the kids aren't in the factories, but we still want them to be doing the dishes and washing clothes and like doing what they're supposed to. Um, like transitioning them out of being part of the workforce and into actually being children and like having children's lives is like an interesting period of time. And it does inform a lot of the books and informs like what Taylor is saying, where like there's just different. It just feels different. It feels like distinctly. There's a word that I don't know, but just distinctly strange for these books to be like read to children in a way where like be as happy as this working horse. This is what you should strive to be up to.
Yeah.
Feels strange.
Yeah, that's very funny. The idea of like using these parables, like what will kids will relate to the animal help,
Yeah,
like we'll put it in terms they can understand. Be a strong draft horse who does what he's told and never questions mama and papa. Yeah,
yeah.
that's wild. So yeah, I think
Well,
I think that's really great fodder for like messing with. You know what I mean? Like you take that and you
yeah.
flip it on its head and change it. Yeah.
Well, like a lot of it as well is like not only like do what your parents want because of your parents, but it's like do the labor because we don't like people that don't work in our society. Like pretty pointedly, it's like if you aren't working all the time and you're just freeloading off of the labor of others, people are going to hate you. In parables, I'm dumbing it all the way down. That's basically what they're saying. And some of what I was flipping through is like you need to want and like working, and if you don't, people are going to be mad that you're just lazy and hanging around.
Right.
8-year old, you you child.
Yeah, and so stories are one way of like disciplining, right? And getting kids to kind of fall in line and understand what the world is really like. Like you're saying, oh, the world just is this way. And so I think it's fun to have these story games where, and that was again kind of the thesis of doing these games. Like we could just tell stories where like the world is different or becomes different or you're empowered to make it different. You have to make it different.
Mm-hmm.
So this will be yet another one where, yeah, I mean, it's we're still exploring what that means with dreams, but I think it'll be fun and different to sort of have that as a space. For sort of contesting like yeah you just have to get a job and it's boring and like put up with a kid like this is like I don't know maybe you don't like maybe there's some other way to be I don't really know I don't know what'll happen but
Yeah.
it's gonna look fantastic and yeah it's exciting to sort of see these sketches coming together I guess since this is technically about drawing as a practice Tony any thoughts we have about 10 minutes any to turn it back to sort of style and what you're doing I see now you're kind of doing what to me looks a little like watercolor, like shading in the color. Um, any thoughts on like how you go about this? So it seems like you're using a thin stroke to kind of do more, uh, pen or pencil style sketches, and then
Mm-hmm.
you're going back and adding this kind of watercolor like layer, which
Yeah.
really looks nice. But yeah, anything you want to
It's
add there?
it's something that I in the stuff that I've pulled out for like reference and that I point to. Um, some of them, none of them really do watercolor stuff, or at least the ones that I was looking at, had like a watercolor or like a soft backing. They had very light colors, but they weren't like brushed in. I think in large part just because the way the books had to be printed when this stuff started to be made. At a certain point, like we had the technology and we were able to print in more color, more detail. But for a long time, it kind of almost had to be like in black and white, like etchings. Um, and so I'm torn because I do like the color. I do like adding the pop of color to it. I think that the game will be ultimately stronger visually for adding color, but there is an artist part of me that is like, man, a lot of these guys, they made these books look good in black and white, and so there is a way to do it. Like they were able to illustrate and like design, compositionally and line work and all the artist words. Like they made it look good with no color. Um, I don't know. So like I'm sure they would have wanted to use color, like the limitations of the printing process at the time didn't allow for it. But um, like I don't know if they can make it look good without color. Like in theory, I should also be able to make it look good without color. Uh, but
Yeah.
also, we want to be able to market and sell the game, and having it be colorful is almost certainly going to be preferable. Like having it be artistically pure might not be the most financially sound decision. Uh,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I
yeah, in
think
the
that
end,
comes back to like the Trump law stuff of like, are we trying to make things that look like modern game books that kind of are a nod or homage to other styles of art, or are we
hmm
trying to make them look like books that were sort of stolen from the by a time traveler from like a
yeah,
future or past library or an alien world or something? Like what are we trying to do there? And I think this came up a lot with in some of the discussions of Danse Macabre. Obviously, we're not trying to make it look like an illuminated manuscript for a bunch of reasons, but we're trying to draw on historical reference for all the art and design. So it's at least grounded in some level of like, okay, this is the kind of line work, these are the kinds of images you might see historically. um, and that kind of undergirds, I think, the writing and the art deeply and makes the game a little different because we'll change stuff if it does, as we learn more. It's just kind of a collective learning process of
yeah,
like, I don't know, I guess this is how this would have been. So we'll go back and, Chris and I will sort of tweak stuff and we'll make decisions. Okay, well, it's been 30 years. It is a mutant apocalypse. So, some stuff is different, right? But it's all grounded. And we want it to be different. We want it to show hope for, okay, in the face of crisis, people band together and are less awful to each other, all these things. So, it's meant to be um, in that vein of like, the apocalypse is an opportunity, um, and people band together. But like in terms of the art and the look, yeah, we want it to look kind of medieval without necessarily caring if it literally looks like you're buying an illuminated manuscript, because that's pretty ridiculous. We're not doing like a leather bound
yeah,
vellum page. Like it's not gonna have gold leaf. It's just like that's beyond the fact that it would cost $1 bajillion. It's also like literally it's like skills we don't have, and it would look, the art actually is terrible from the time. Like it's almost good. It's like the
yeah. If we
pre-Renaissance
were
stuff.
actually trying to like emulate it, like,
Yeah, but the faces are all fugly. I have this huge
yeah,
book called Illuminating Fashion. That's this amazing edited volume of plates from the late, specifically this time period, basically the end of the 14th century into the 15th century, and it's like it's great because it shows people's clothes, and it's very colorful. And this is beyond, we're kind of in the moment of the book. Actually, I think in the high grisaille era, everything's like soft grays and yellows, but like,
hmm
the rich people are still doing these books where it's all colorful. But it's crazy because the faces are all. I was saying this yesterday in the Danse Macabre game. It's like the Aphex Twin video where it's like everyone's face is an old man's face, so it's just terrifying.
yeah,
So I think we wouldn't do it for a variety of reasons in that case. I will say in another case with a book we're putting out through Plus One XP. So it's not a Stillfleet Studio book, but it's a book I wrote and Gay laid out called Picaro, which is set in 1700. So that's like a zine
hmm
about like early modern fantasy. That book is, and you're meant to basically play a criminal who's fighting the horrible oppressive order of society of the day, and it's really inspired by Tristram Shandy and Don Quixote. That book is supposed to look like Tristram Shandy. It's supposed to look like a book from 1700 in terms of the art, and then the design is supposed to look like a book from 1970 because we wanted it to be a lost, forgotten treasure. Like, oh, remember as a kid, like there was D&D, Tunnels and Trolls, and Picaro. So we wanted to make the book look like, kind of evoke specific time periods, and that's actually hard and requires research. And I don't know if we did it 100%, but I think it made it better because it gave us a
hmm
lot of design direction. So I think that, just to say, I think it's interesting, Tony, to bring yet another era that, again, like I don't know anything about children's books. Sounds like we should be talking to Taylor, but you know,
yeah,
we definitely there's a lot of room to grow with all these projects, but it's fun because it does give us really specific kind of pillars creatively, where it's like, okay, it needs to, use these colors, right? Use these kinds of typefaces, whatever.
Yeah, it
Um,
does. It puts in place, I don't know, good limitations, like design restraints that I think are useful. Um, and then I think the taste making part is like deciding which of those we aren't gonna follow. Like, so for Danse Macabre, we're like, well, we don't want the ugly, like, old man face on everything. Like, it makes me think of all the drawings of like baby Jesus, but with just like a horrid old man face on top of it. But like, that's a thing where we're like, it'll be better if we swap up the style and do our own thing. But for other parts of it, well, we do want it to evoke um, illuminated manuscripts to some extent, so we want to have there be ornamentation that kind of runs down the side, and be specific in our font choices, so that they kind of follow and feel a certain way. That is an aspect of all the stuff that I'm uh, doing with Pistols and Pajamas that is fun for me as an artist. Like, I like illustrating. I draw all day, every day, so I have to like it at least a little bit. But the fun parts of it are the kind of, I don't know, the faux research aspect of it, where I'm like, well, what fonts were in use at the time? If we're trying to make this like a book that came out of the time, there was only so many font choices that bookmakers even had to choose from. Um, and so like it can only be a couple of them. But then you look at, I don't have the file open. The one of the big artists of the time did Wizard of Oz, or one of the books of Wizard of Oz, and the typography is nuts. It's like, it's crazy. I think I found a font that has it. If I can't find it real quick, but um, yeah, like, this is like a shoddy digitization that somebody did, but
oh
like
yeah,
has all these like really wacky
that looks great.
um like choices in it, and his layout is cool, is like super. So like, all that to say, like, even looking back, like in trying to pick, like, what do I want to evoke, there's lots of books of that time, even for kids, that are just um like single column text for pages and pages and pages. And actually, because they started being made this like intentionally for kids, is why they started adding illustrations and making them more visually interesting. Um, but I don't want to go that far back. I don't want it to just be a single column A5 book of just text. Um, so I want to be somewhat further along and somewhat emulate some of the wackier folks of the time. But then there's also like, well, they really didn't have rollable tables at the time, where they didn't have like stat blocks. So like, what does that look like when we go to put those together? Um, is fun to consider, and
Yeah,
try and figure out how we're going to make it work. Even in insofar as Danse Macabre is concerned, is a similar thing that we talked about a couple of days ago that I have to start thinking on, is like, what does a stat block look like?
right,
We're just
right.
going to do it in text, and it'll still look good. But if there's some way that we can transform it and have it look of the time, I do think it gives it like a non-zero boost to the overall like charm, but also just quality of the game.
Yeah. Yeah, and thinking about what are the limited, there were bestiaries and such, but I'm thinking more just how things were presented. It's like panels, like a lot of that work. There's literally different panels that things are being painted on,
Mm-hmm.
scenes, whether it's daily life, a coronation, a biblical scene, a marriage, a folktale. But there's also like inset, like there'll be like sort of almost comic book style, like cordoned off areas within a scene, where it's like these really bad perspective, like basically it's meant to be sort of x-ray vision inside a house, and it's almost like functions like a comic book of like you're suddenly,
Mm-hmm.
you have a little inset panel of a guy inside the castle or whatever. So maybe it's something like that, drawing on simple lines to sort of have stat blocks and basically monster art, bounded a certain way on the page. But yeah, I hear you. For each of these books, that's one of the struggles. Is it's not just about art in terms of illustration or just writing. It's trying to marry it through graphic design to some kind of product that looks, again, either, it's kind of a spectrum. How much do we want it to look of a
Yeah.
certain time and place versus just it looks cool. It's a cool thing. It's charming. It's easy to read. It's fun. It looks inviting. And we all
Mm-hmm.
go to stores and we just flip through these books. And we're like, oh, this looks so cool. Really, every time I flip through Ultraviolet Grasslands. I'm like, great. Just is probably one of my favorite of the kinds of books we or that I set out to make. It's like it looks cool every time. It's just laid out nicely. So this is
Yeah,
great.
for
Like
sure.
that's a super cool mix of a little bit of color with art with text that could easily be like in a game book.
Yeah, like this is the what I've been
Yeah,
looking at, where like it's not like watercolored, right? Like the color is still flat, like
yeah,
largely flat, but like even illustration style wise, it almost looks like it looks old, but like somewhat modern in like a weird like way, just because it looks not like what other stuff did at
it's very
the
green.
time.
Yeah,
There's lots of like it's like a gross green. There's lots of like blues, but also like here's more of like the type. It's just hand drawn, wacky. Like this is like an example of what I was looking at that like stood out from like the rest of what I was looking at. Not even just like illustration wise, but also like layout wise. This he did a couple of books in this style, and they all have similar like interesting like layout choices. Um, like, this is kind of hard to read, but maybe it's just the way that
yeah.
it was scanned. But
No, it probably is hard to read, but it is also striking. So it's these are always choices we're making about how cluttered page composition should be. Um, well, Tony, it's past one, but this is really fantastic. So it's very cool to see some of the reference. And yeah, maybe next time, if whenever we're doing this, maybe we can bring in more reference by other artists.
sure.
And just talk about the things that inspire us. But yeah, thanks for sharing your process. Anything else you wanted to cover? You wanted to explore things you feel like now having spent an hour doodling, you want to make sure you do next time. Anything you want to sort of leave with?
Um, no, I do think that there are so many directions I can take Pistols and Pajamas. The illustration work that we're looking at now is very different from what I was kind of sketching up today. Um, and so at a certain point, like it has to be one or the other. For me, if I'm going to be illustrating all of it, I don't want there to be a ton of different styles. And now looking at this guy's illustrations for this book, I'm kind of like, I think I want to do that. I think I think that might be more visually appealing and fun. But also, it definitely evokes a different feeling. This doesn't feel as Wild Westy or as old timey. So like,
Yeah, although that to me is a plus. I don't love it being Wild Westy myself, so I'm fine with it just being
sure.
like
Well, I guess I mean
you know,
like the etched or
frontiery.
the yeah, like it just reads like a. This doesn't feel like a 30s pulp magazine of the time that would have like cowboy illustrations in it. Um, which is like a different kind of style, but I feel like this sketched like ink work just reads as like Americana pilled.
Yeah, yeah, coded as kind of pulpy, zingy, like there's something adventuresome about to happen. Even it's
Yeah,
a bird with a party
it
hat.
definitely
Yeah.
reads pulpier than the stuff I was showing, but I think the stuff I was showing might be more akin to the style that I'd be able to pull off with less effort, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's a question of how classic dreamy versus yeah, pulpy. But I mean, to me, what you're showing in terms of the sketch style is very inspired by that cartooning kind of the sketchiness of it, which I like, and it gives a certain
Mm-hmm.
other kind of life. But I agree, yeah, some of the actual late 19th century, early 20th century stuff is kind of classic. Maybe classic poster, just these people are highly trained illustrators at the time, right? So, question for another day. Leave that to you. We'll continue to work. I think I owe you some thoughts on writing out some mechanics. But yeah, the game's coming along, and it'll be in our zine series, ZineWorks. And the first ZineWorks product we're about to print finally is a Blister Critters episode written by our friend Lenny
Yeah.
Shell. Of course, design and illustration by Anthony Grasso. I just edited it, and it's really cool. It's really good. It's about plants, which is a special interest to me. So yeah, hopefully these smaller products are really fun ways to get out some of our creative work. And yeah, appreciate anyone who watches the stream. If you have questions in the future, we do this every other week, noon Eastern on Sundays. And usually we have Ethan Gouldini and often, increasingly, Anthony Grasso. So bring your questions. And yeah, if you're interested in sharing your own work with us, about RPG design specifically, get in touch. You can find us on Discord, discord.stillfleet.com. We're at Stillfleet everywhere, and Tony is at Oddgob Grasso or Oddgob Games. Gob, G-O-B, so Oddgob. And yeah, that's about it. Tony, anything else before I end the stream?
Nope, nothing
Cool.
else for me.
Thanks a lot, man. And I'll see you before this, but we'll see everyone on the Livedrawing live stream in 2 weeks. Bye, Taylor. Thank you for watching and asking smart questions and telling us things. Bye.
Later.